I think my research is focusing on China-Africa studies and China studies, working
Tungamirai
on
Eric
trying
Mupona,
to
hailing from
really
Zimbabwe,
understand
is a
what has
doctoral
been
student
happening in China
specializing
in
in
terms of
international affairs and
its
global governance
economic
at
development.
Zhejiang
There
University.
has been this.
The 26-year-old first arrived in China in 2017 as an undergraduate student of applied physics. But over time, his interests shifted from the physical sciences to a deeper exploration of societal dynamics. In this edition of Footprints, he shares with us his observations of China's development, particularly the annual 2 sessions. As a doctoral student of international affairs and global governance, Tungamirai Eric Mupona is busy with his research and observation of the developments happening in China.
There is a lot that is happening now, as someone who is following what is happening out there in the society. I know that the 2 sessions are around the corner, and I'm actually also following up the news. I think that's actually what is keeping me busy. I think because we have seen how China has been developing new technologies and how the EV industry is fast growing. And now we have AI, with all of these new technological innovations that are hitting the ground running. I think in this year's 2 sessions, I will be really interested to hear more what the policymakers is going to be saying about the development of such industries.
The 2 sessions are important annual political meetings in China. The Lianghui, as it is known in Chinese, are the annual sessions of the National People's Congress, or NPC, and the National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC. The NPC is China's top legislature, and the CPPCC is the country's top political advisory body. The meetings usually take place in early March and last for about a week. During the 2 sessions, thousands of national lawmakers and political advisors gather in Beijing to discuss issues related to every aspect of China's development and people's well-being. Mupona notes that the Chinese economy faces some challenges, such as additional tariffs against certain Chinese industries by the United States and the European Union.
I'm looking forward to see what kind of policy packages China are going to produce as we get into 2025.
Despite the challenges, the observer remains optimistic about the prospects of Chinese economic growth.
I'm very, very optimistic because if we first take a look at the data, the statistics for China's economic development over the past years, it's been amazing. Even if we take a look at what happened last year, I read the report of the 2024 2 sessions. China had reached 5.2% GDP growth in 2023, which was actually higher than the target that was set of 5%. So I'm sure that the similar thing will happen in this coming year, despite that there are also some challenges that the Chinese economy is going to be facing, especially anti-globalization forces coming from the outside. So I'm very optimistic that the Chinese policymakers will have perfect solutions to those challenges.
Mupona further explains that the Chinese economy enjoys a wide range of advantages and is well positioned to fend off any challenges.
I think the Chinese economy doesn't only depend on the external market. There is dual circulation here. It has a huge market internally. It is a fact that those other markets that may be trying to kind of be very protective really cannot depend on their own. They also need China. All those big markets, the products that they are producing, they also need this huge Chinese market. So I think the policymakers will be trying to just come up with policies that seek for, I would say, fair deals as they are dealing with other countries, win-win. I think that is going to be the situation there, and also trying to tap into a lot of emerging markets there. For instance, Africa is an emerging market. I've seen over the past years that we have seen a lot of Chinese investors getting into the African market. So in the future, maybe this is going to be a new trend where they'll be going in numbers to invest in the African market. And that means that they are also creating another new opportunity for their products within the African market.
Mupona has been an observer of the two sessions since October 2020, when he had a close-up look at the working mechanism of the CPPCC National Committee during a tour to Beijing.
The first time I got into contact with two sessions was in 2020. What happened in 2020 was I was attending the China-Africa Youth Festival. The fifth China-Africa Youth Festival had invited 41 youth representatives from 41 African countries. So I was part of the delegation. I was representing Zimbabwe there. One of the most interesting parts of that whole setup during the fifth China-Africa Youth Festival was a trip to the National Committee of the CPPCC in Beijing. We spent almost half a day there. We visited a couple of places there where during the meetings where they do the deliberations, I remember we visited the exhibition hall where they exhibited the history of the CPPCC. We had to understand its roles, its functions, how does it interact with other legislative bodies, and as in the top advisory body of China, how does it really impact China's policy decisions and China's policy making, and how does it connect the CPC with other non-CPC parties? So it was a very good opportunity for me to learn about how this whole thing happens, China's political system. So that's where I started knowing about the two sessions.
In fact, Mupona was originally a student of applied physics when he was an undergraduate student, but he gradually developed an interest in the economic, social and political affairs of China. He says the year of 2020 was rather a turning point for him. His trip to Beijing made him want to change his major to a social science one.
At that time, I was studying applied physics. I was at Zhejiang University of Science and Technology. So that's actually how I started developing more interest into studying China, into China studies, because I got exposed to these kind of opportunities to know more about China.
As a result, he applied for his master's degree studies in international affairs and global governance at Zhejiang University, one of the top universities in China.
When I came to Zhejiang University in 2021, one of the courses that we had, Chinese politics and diplomacy, had an introduction on Chinese political system. So first lesson, the professor there was introducing how the Chinese political system looks like. And so I had a more deep understanding theoretically of what is two sessions and how does it really operate and what is its role in China's political system. So now combining that with my experiences that I had in 2020, I got even more interest in following almost every year's two sessions. So it's a must that every year I need to understand, I need to learn what is happening, what is the theme of this year, what are the core discussions.
Since then, this young man has taken it as his own mission to understand and study China, to see what development experience it can offer to other developing countries. To fulfill his mission, he has not only tried to observe the country from a top-down perspective, but more importantly, he has adopted the bottom-up approach, traveling across the country and carrying out research in the field. His footprints have reached more than a dozen provincial-level regions, from the developed Zhejiang province in the east coast to the less developed Shanxi province in North China. He focused on discovering how China has been spurring its economic and social development, especially in the rural areas. He chose one particular mountainous county called Jinyun in the south of Zhejiang province as his case study. Mupona says it's very convenient for him to travel from Hangzhou, the provincial capital, to the county, which only takes 1 hour and a half by high-speed train.
It has been fascinating because my first time to go to Jinyun was in 2022. I'm someone who has always been interested in going to rural areas. That's where I find more interesting experiences about China's development. So from 2022 to now, I've been going there almost every month. I actually ended up writing my master's thesis on Jinyun's experience. So in 2023, I even ended up making Jinyun my study field. So I wrote a whole master's thesis based on Jinyun case study. because I was talking about rural China's economic development and the relationship between the state and the market in rural China. So I found very interesting experiences there. The state has been playing a very critical role in promoting the economic, social development in rural China, and how the government there interact with the markets. The government is not trying to replace the role of the market, but creating more opportunities for the market to really foster that kind of development. So over the past 3 years, from 2022 to today, what I've seen there is a huge change in terms of the infrastructure there.
Every time he goes to Jinyun County, the young man carries out in-depth exchanges with local officials and villagers. He shares his experience in one particular village, which has invoked lots of thoughts for him.
A very little village that I usually visit, where I interact with the party secretary of that village there. Most of the times we even have WeChat. So every time I go to Jinmin, I visit that little village. It's called Lianghui village. I went there this year during the Spring Festival, and what I saw there is that they now have some companies surrounding the village. So they have these industrial parks that they've managed to attract very close to the village. And very close to that village, there is a new hospital. So there's a lot that has been happening within very short space of time. And I was interacting with him, and he was telling me that, you see all these buildings that you have, the new ones that you are seeing there. We even have companies that are already in there, and we are planning to have some companies offering jobs for our villagers here so that they can have employment at their doorstep. They call them Gong Fu, Gong Fa. Gong Fu meaning like common prosperity. I got so fascinated. So this is why I find myself glued to rural China, because there are a lot of changes that are happening there. There is a lot to explore. If you would want to know how China is changing so fast and what is really happening, I think the best way is going to those kind of places where you can trace development. Maybe in the cities, it won't be easy to see because infrastructure is almost complete already.
Undoubtedly, this young man has been fascinated by the economic and social development happening in China over the past several decades. But, as a scholar, he tries to discover the driving forces behind these changes.
The Chinese government have played a very critical role in shaping the development in today's China. Over the past 40 years, we have seen this fast economic development. And really, it is very, very, very related with the policy and institutions that the Chinese government has adopted. So those institutions really would decide the kind of opportunities that are going to be there for the private sector, the opportunities that are going to be there in the market. And secondly, I think it is the institutions themselves. I think the institutions that the Chinese government has made in rural China or in China from a large perspective, they are really the institutions for growth, the institutions that work. China has not really tried to copy any other institutions from other countries. Of course, China learns and do it the Chinese way.
Mupona notes that different regions across China have been smart in making use of their comparative advantages to develop themselves. He likes to use the Chinese term yindizhiyi to describe the practice. Yindizhiyi literally means adapting plans to local conditions.
In China, every region has its own way of doing things that may be different from others, depending on the type of resources that they have. ENTG is what matters. Of course, policies are coming from the national level being uniform, but how are you going to implement them within your locality? Now depends with your capacity and your resources that you have. If you are not close to the oceans, then you cannot have an industry that is focusing on seaports, on development of seaports, right? You focus on what you do have. So from these coastal areas like Zhejiang, Guangdong, going all the way to those inland areas in the far west, you see quite a lot of different models coming out. So this is, I think, how China has managed to make it.
Mupona is expected to graduate from his doctoral studies in 2027. His current research project focuses on China's development experience and what and how other developing countries can learn from it.
Of course, I think that China presents a lot of lessons. First of all, China is not trying to teach other developing countries that development must be done this way. But what I think we can see from China is that try to make use of a competitive advantage. For instance, Zimbabwe has huge natural resources. This endowment is going to play a very critical role for our economic growth. So that means that we now should make use of that and have policies in place to make sure we reap benefits from those industries. If we are going to neglect them, then it means that maybe growth is going to be slow for us. For the whole African continent, we have a very young population. More than 60% of the population is under the age of 25, a very young population. And that means that all the policies that should be coming out in many African countries should be focusing on the youth, should be focusing on how can we make use of these labor resources. I think maybe we can attract more investment from Chinese companies, more Chinese companies that are looking for low labor costs. They can come into the African continent and we provide space for that. That means that we are making use of our competitive advantage. So I think those are the lessons that we get.
Mupona was born and grew up in a rural area in northern Zimbabwe. When he was in high school, he began developing an interest in China. When he was 18 years old, the teenager decided to pursue his undergraduate studies in the Asian country. As a result, he came to China in 2017 as an international student. Humble but ambitious, the young man worked hard to learn the Chinese language and other academic subjects. As someone who previously knew nothing about the Chinese language, he was able to communicate with others in Chinese after only 1 year of learning in China.
就是基本上是这样子，就是要看书，要做一些交友。I think after a year, I could be able to at least communicate. Because I remember in 2018, I was already participating in some activities out there with some Chinese, and I could briefly introduce myself, could tell them I'm from Zimbabwe, I could tell them I studied at Zhejiang University of Science and Technology. Of course, the conversation couldn't get more deeper, but at least basic interactions were guaranteed. So I think after a year, I could be able to speak basic Chinese. 可能就是做研究嘛，跟导师沟通，然后跟
Mupona has spent about 8 years in China, transitioning from an undergraduate of applied physics to a researcher specializing in the development of China. He says his journey in China has been a process of self-discovery, meaning he has found out what he is really interested in and what his life goals are. As he is now well on track in his doctoral studies, the young man is full of hope for his future and certain that he will be working to promote mutual understanding and exchanges between China and Africa.
The target is that by 2027 I should be done with my PhD studies. After that, I plan to stay a little bit in China. I think there is still a lot to learn from China, and if I could get an opportunity to further my understanding of China here and gather more experiences, gather more resources, I think it would be very helpful for me. In the future, I'm someone who is very interested to work on development issues and diplomacy, especially anything related to China-Africa.
With that, we conclude this edition of Footprints. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Jones. If you're interested in hearing more about the lives of ordinary but incredible people in China, follow us on your favorite podcast platforms. Just key in Footprints and you can find more stories anytime, anywhere. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.